I'm going to ask Grandpa Ryan some questions. My first question I'm going to ask Grandpa is to tell me where he was born, what city he was born in.
I was born in Brighton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston.
If you want, could you tell us when you were born?
Yes. I was born on March 22nd, 1905 at 9:30 in the morning.
Oh. And one more question. Could you tell us what your parents' names were?
My mother's name was Nona, N-O-N-A, Marie O'Grady, and she was born on April 8th, 1875.
Oh, boy.
100 years ago tomorrow.
Amazing. And could you tell us about your grandpa, grandpa?
My daddy's name was John Michael Ryan. Yeah. He was born on Thanksgiving Day, November 28th, in 1872.
Okay, now we're going to ask Grandma Ryan some questions, but we're not going to ask her when she was born unless she really wants to tell us.
Sure.
So would Grandma Ryan tell us where she was born?
I was born in East Quogue, Long Island.
And if you want, you could tell us about when or when.
On June 1st, 1904.
And could you tell us about your parents, our grandparents?
Yeah. Yes, my father was born in East Quogue.
And what was his name?
Fletcher Irwin. In 1881. Huh?
Fletcher Irwin Rockefeller.
Oh, yes, I left out the Rockefeller.
Okay, tell us about your mother.
My mother's name was Ambrosine Veronica O'Malley, and she was born in Ireland in 1882 on Christmas Day.
On Christmas Day?
Okay, now just for the record, we'll say that John and Brendan and Michael Casey are here along with me, and I'm John Casey. Now I have to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to go back and ask Grandpa to tell us a couple of things.
What?
Now we'll ask the boys to be very quiet during this conversation. Would Grandpa tell us about his uncles and his aunts? Did his father have some brothers and sisters?
My father was the youngest of quite a few brothers and sisters.
How many?
I am not absolutely sure. The oldest was Morris, and then came John, and then came Michael, and then came Ed, and then came
what?
Nora. But back after Morris came Kate. There were two girls and that number of boys. And after all of them had been born, John Michael, my father, was named after the first two that had died. And if I missed Simon, there was a Simon also.
Ned. Ned?
I did say Ned.
No, I have more story telling about my grandparents and my parents.
Yeah. Let's ask Grandpa to tell us about his mother's.
On my mother's
brothers and sisters.
On my mother's of my mother's family, the oldest boy was John. The second oldest was Margaret. The third oldest was Dennis. The fourth oldest was James. The fifth oldest was twins. And I do not remember their names. I probably have it. After Jim, my mother was born, who was Noni. But the two younger children died of diphtheria at 8 or 9 years old, and they were twins.
Uncle Marty wouldn't have forgotten these facts.
Well, I have them in the other room if anybody
No,
wants.
what we're really doing is just having a little conversation. We'll go as long as the tape will let us, and we'll try to ask you to tell us about the grand aunts and grand uncles. Now we'll ask Grandma to tell us about her mother and her father, their brothers and sisters' names.
Really?
My father had one sister, Frances Altina Whitman, and they had 3 children. And my mother had a sister, Belle, a brother, Walter, who had been killed by the Bushmen in Australia, and another brother, Jim, who was a cavalry officer in the Spanish-American War, and an older brother, John, who came from Bungary, Ireland, and lived most of his life there, and part of his time in Paterson, New Jersey. He was my godfather.
And that's all of her brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Now on your father's side, his brothers and sisters.
I mentioned my aunt, just one.
Oh, just one?
Just one, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's fine now.
I
Do you want to
see,
tell
yeah.
us anything about them that you
Well,
remember that's
my
special?
grandfather and, John D. Rockefeller sent me a congratulation note at the time of my engagement, and his picture was in the same paper. And John D. Rockefeller Sr. looked enough like my grandfather to be his brother.
You again for just a review once more. Did you leave anyone out in the aunts and uncles of your mother or your father?
No, you didn't mention our sisters, though. I had 3 sisters.
No, but let's go back to your mother and father, their brothers and sisters. In other words, your aunts and uncles. Did you leave anyone out?
No.
Yeah, you did. And
wait.
Elmer.
Yeah, Elmer, yes, out of my mother's family.
Okay. Okay. And would you want to tell us anything about your aunts or uncles that was unusual about any one of them?
Yes, an unusual thing is the fact that my grandmother had a brother who was the same age as my father. And their 2 boys, and we 4, all grew up together. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
He's a historian now down at Southampton Museum.
Okay. Where did they settle, these aunts and uncles?
Southampton. Most of them. And then my ancestors were whalers that went all down to Montauk and...
Well, I'm not going back past your parents now. We could do that on
And an interesting
another
thing
table.
is that-
But let's just talk about your aunts and your uncles. All of them settled in Southampton,
on the island. Southampton, Bridgehampton, Sag Harbor.
but all on Long Island.
All on Long
They didn't
Island.
move out of New York
No,
or
no,
Long
no,
Island
no,
for the most part.
None of them.
Well, let's ask Grandpa a question about his aunts and his uncles. Did they remain in the general Boston area, Brighton area?
No, they were all, my dad came down to Boston after he graduated from Norwich University. All my uncles and aunts originally were in Northfield, Vermont, and around Northfield, Vermont, both on mother's and dad's side, Roxbury, Vermont, and they all settled within 50 or 60 miles of that, with the exception of my uncle Ed, who, because of a lung condition, went out to Cedar City, Utah, and brought his family out there.
He was the only one who moved away.
He was the only one that moved
We
away.
have a
and
lot
he
of
just-
first cousins who are Mormons as a result of it.
Okay, now let me just for the record, just to be sure that we've gotten everything straight. Have we gotten the names of all your aunts and uncles straight?
I'll go through them quickly. My grandfather, Edmund Ryan, born 1827, died 1900, married Ellen Leahy, who was born in 1827 and died in 1917. My uncles then would be Morris, 1857 to 1922.
Wait, now your uncle on whose side?
This is all on my father's
All your
side.
father's side, fine.
And then John Michael, which corrects what I said before, was born in 1861 and died in 1878, was not married. James Ryan, James W. Ryan, 1865 to 1909, was not married. Simon, 1867 to 1895, not married. Catherine, 1859 to 1953, and Nora, 1863, died about 1940. John Michael, who was my father, was named after Michael John, his older brother, who had died, and was born in 1872 and died in 1937. On my mother's side, my mother's father, my grandfather, Patrick O'Grady, born in 1827 and died in 1920. Helen Maxey, his wife, born in 1845 and died in 1909. My Uncle John, the oldest, born about 1865 and died about 1920. Margaret was born about 1867, died about 1947. Michael was born shortly after Margaret, probably in about 1868 or 69, and died about 1935. Dennis was born 1872 and died 1947, and Mother was born in 1875 and
They have a daughter who's had 10 kids. Her picture's right there.
and died in 1936.
Okay. Now we've gone through all of the brothers. Your answer.
1937 was my mother.
Oh,
my
sorry.
father, 1936, yeah.
All of the names. Now, in some cases you mentioned that they were married or not. If you left out that they were married, does that mean they were single through their lives?
I mentioned they were the only ones...
3 more in college.
Quickly going through it again. John was not married. James was not married. Simon was not married. Catherine was married. Nora was married.
Well, now, when you say they were married, would you mention who they married if you know?
Oh, sure. Catherine was married to Albert O'Hare, and she had
O'Hare is
twin daughters, Alice and Ellen, born in 1902, and a son, Edward, who was born in 1906. Nora was married Bartholomew Early. They had no children. My father had an oldest daughter named Beatrice Leola, born in 1902, who died in 1921. Myself, Harold John, in 1905. James Edmund, 1906, married Alva Rockefeller, and they had...
let's go through all the brothers.
All the brothers. And then James Edmund, I gave you that one, 1906. Robert William, 1910. Edward, he was married.
And who did he marry?
Dorothy, I can't
all right.
remember that name. No.
If you don't remember, it's
No.
fine. All right.
And then Edward Dennis, who married Marilyn...
Kavanaugh.
No, Edward Dennis married Marilyn in
California.
Oh, yeah, Johnson.
Marilyn Johnson.
And
Edward was born in 1916. Bob was born in 1910. I don't know if I mentioned that.
okay, no. And you had a sister.
My sister Beatrice Leola, she was born in I gave you that one.
Yes. Okay.
1902, and she died when she was 18. 19.
All right. Just for you gave us all the dates, but which member of your brothers and sisters were you? The first, second, third born?
Beatrice was first. I was the second. Jim was the third. Robert was the fourth, and
Eddie was
the baby.
Okay, fine. Now let's turn to Grandma and ask her to tell us about her brothers and sisters and what their names were. You don't really, since Grandpa's working off of records in front of him, he can give us the dates, but let me
I
ask
can
you.
do it.
If you know them, tell
Sure.
us. Maybe starting with the oldest and through the
I was
brothers.
the oldest, no brothers.
No brothers.
I was the oldest, and I gave you the date of my birth.
Yes.
And then was Elva, who was born 2 years later in July 1906, married James Ryan. And then Omer, Helen Omer, her name is really, married Joe Bolsey, had 3 children. Anne Brzezin married John Crane, and she's the fourth one.
When was she born, do you know?
Yes, April 25th, 1911. And she had one daughter, Anne Brzezin. They call her Susie. So it's a small family on my side.
Okay, that's fine. Now, I'm going to stop for a moment. Let me just chat a little. Back to Grandpa again we'll go back to Grandpa for a moment just to see. He mentions that we've gone through the names of his aunts and uncles, but there were some, I think, that were left out. These were uncles who had died.
These were uncles who died when they were children. The names of the twins on my mother's side, the names of the twins were Richard and Bernard O'Grady. They died when they were probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And Patrick O'Grady died as an infant. He was the youngest of the O'Grady clan.
Okay. Now
let me
any
see
others
if I have any others. I have...
well, to the best of your memory, you've gone through.
That's it.
Okay, that's all I wanted. Now let me ask each of you some questions for conversation and perhaps for a little historical record. We'll start with Grandpa and ask to tell us something about himself, where he went to school. For example, when you went to grammar school, do you remember which grammar school it was,
Sure
where
do.
it was, which high school you went to,
Sure.
which college, and then after college, which university you went to?
That.
Well, let's just kind of sketch that out, and then we'll ask Grandma the same kind of question.
Yeah.
And this is from memory, not from notes, so if you have to go back and correct something...
I don't have
that.
any notes. It's on this. I just remembered. Are you on tape now?
We're on tape, and why don't you tell us about your schooling?
I entered kindergarten in the Hobart Street School, which was about a block and a half from home in Brighton, and went through the 3rd grade there. In the 3rd and the 4th grade, we had one teacher and 2 classes in the room. Then in the 5th grade, we moved to the Mary Lyons School, where I took the 5th, 6th, and grades, and then moved to the Bennett School up in Brighton, where I took the 7th and 8th grades, and graduated to Brighton High School, where I graduated in 1921. In 1922, I graduated and went to MIT, and I was in MIT from 1922 to 26.
When you were at MIT, could you tell me just a little bit about the curriculum you took? Was it...
I was an electrical engineer specializing in power plant design, and studied electrical engineering. Of course, MIT was then known as the factory, and we also had to learn all about machinery and steam engines and all the things that go into a power plant, everything that goes into a power plant.
Did you stay at MIT for a master's degree?
No, after I graduated from MIT, I went down on a training course for the Westinghouse Company in East Pittsburgh, and while I was there, I took some courses in the University of Pittsburgh in business administration, and then I was transferred before those courses were completed into the town of Sharon, Pennsylvania, in the upper northwest corner of Pennsylvania, where I took a business administration course I took a business administration course with the La Salle Extension University, a correspondence course. And I continued on with that course back down into Philadelphia in May of 1928. And then in the summer of 1928, I was transferred back to Pittsburgh again, where I stayed until November of 28, when I was transferred to New York City. And the following year, I registered at New York University and took a master's degree in business administration, which gave me a degree in 1931 in business administration. Okay. I had finished my La Salle extension course at the same time, and then I worked for Westinghouse in the New York office in the mining division, working on power plants and industrial equipment. And then I moved from there in the Depression. I moved to the Westinghouse Supply Company for about 4 months, but that was very uninteresting. And at the end of 4 or 5 months, I went out with everybody else in the Depression. After 2 or 3 months of unemployment, I went to work in selling elevator repairs for 6 months, made $832 for the year, and after I was married, I got married in 1932. 1933, I ended up going to the air conditioning business, which I've been ever since.
Very good. Now let's ask Grandma somewhat the same kind of question. Let's start with what you did by way of either going to kindergarten or to elementary school, which schools it was, and then go through your schooling years. And that would help.
There was no kindergarten. I started school at the age of 8, and it was a 3-room schoolhouse with 3 teachers, and I learned so much the first year that I skipped the 2nd grade and went right into the 3rd.
Very nice.
And that's something. And I just had the 3 teachers during the whole 8 years in grammar school. And nobody went to high school in those days, but a principal coached his son and me in Latin and algebra. And we went to Southampton High School. And I took a business course. And when I finished and took the Regents exam, I took Algebra 2 because I had studied it. And the principal came and told me that I got the highest mark in the entire class. And if I was going into business and not going to school anymore, I ought to have more English and math. And she hoped that I would consider going to school a little longer. And of course, I never stopped. Then I went to Riverhead High School the next year, and Patchogue the next 2 years, and really did the 4 years of high school in 3 years in spite of all the moving. And then I went to St. Joseph's College, got up at 5 every morning and took a train and walked 2 miles to the station in the morning, walked another mile to the college in Brooklyn, and the same thing repeated at night. And I got a bachelor's degree in 1926, and then a year and a half got my master's degree, started work on my doctorate, finished all the work on the doctorate except the oral examination, or except the thesis rather, and married Ryan instead of pursuing the rest of my education.
And I mentioned at this particular point that the fact that she married me was I gave her a choice of whether she wanted an MRS or a PhD.
Very good. And when did you get married?
In 1932. And for many years,
August 6th.
For many years, my husband was Marita Rockefeller's husband, but very shortly afterwards, I became Harold Ryan's wife.
Okay.
Because of our business.
And now let's ask Grandpa to tell us. You were married August 6, 1932.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where were you married? What parish was that? Well, Grandma could tell.
Yeah, she can tell.
St. Francis de Sales in Patchogue, Long Island.
Mm-hmm. And
married by the president of our college.
And could you just tell us when you were married? Was it in the morning or afternoon? And
nuptial mass in the morning.
In the morning, mm-hmm. And there was a family gathering and
family and college graduates, college friends.
Okay.
On the Feast of the Transfiguration.
On the Feast of the Transfiguration. Right.
Very nice. Okay, now let's just mention, and Grandpa can do this, the names of your children. The oldest,
He won't know them.
You want their ages and the years?
Oh,
of
I
them?
can do that out of my
I got
head.
them
Grandma,
right here.
just, I don't need the dates.
No, all right.
The
Well,
oldest was
first,
Marita, born in
Beatrice,
1933.
And then you
Marita
go
Beatrice,
ahead.
born
And give the first and second name if you do it.
Marita Beatrice,
Yes.
born October 22nd, 1933. Philip Dennis, March 26th, 1936. Patricia Marie, born December 10th, 1939. Roberta Omer, born April 30th, 1944. And Barbara Anita, born April 8th, 1946.
On her grandmother's birthday.
On her grandmother's birthday.
Now, from memory, we'll ask Grandpa perhaps to help us on this. Where did you first live after you were married? Did you live in New York or in the
Yes,
New York area?
we rented an apartment at 7410 Ridge Boulevard
In Brooklyn.
And you
prior to that, we had both lived in Brooklyn and quartered
Rooming
in
houses.
Brooklyn. Yeah, rooming
Okay,
houses.
and were you at that time, I don't recall the dates, but were you still working on your master's at NYU then?
No, I had finished it
You
the
were
year I
both-
was married.
We both finished.
I finished it in June, and we were married in August. Or a year before June, I don't remember exactly.
And were you working, were you in business for yourself then or with...
No, I had left Westinghouse in 1932, and before, in the early part of 32. And then I was married at the time we had gotten, when I left Westinghouse. And then I worked after that with the elevator company for a few months. And then I went to work for Frigidaire. And after working with Frigidaire until 1939, I went into business for myself as a contractor. And then in 1955, I went into business as a consulting engineer, selling my contracting business. I had been a professional engineer since 1937 in New York.
Okay, now, you first lived in an apartment in Brooklyn, and following that, at some point you bought a house in Brooklyn.
No, we didn't buy a house. We moved into another apartment, another two-family house in 1937, and we stayed in that house until 1940.
12 years.
Do you remember where that was?
That was in 461 81st Street. Yeah.
81st Street in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
And
then we bought this house out here. We came out here in the summertime and rented it for a year or two in Boquat and East Setauket.
We rented two other houses too.
And we also bought this house in 1942, and we used it as a summer house and a vacation home until 1947, at which time we built it all over and made an all-year-round house. At that time, our oldest daughter was ready to enter high school, and we brought her out. We brought the family out here so the children could go to high school here instead of in the city.
But in Brooklyn, did you ever buy a house?
Never.
No.
No, you rented houses there.
We contemplated buying one, but we bought this one out here instead.
The price was fixed and we got a good rate. $72 a month.
And now let me ask Grandma about her employment. You worked for the New York City Board of Education about the time you were married, or at the time?
Yes, before. 6 years before. I worked 6 years before I was married, and then I worked off and on, maybe 10 years off and on, till our children all came.
Do you recall the schools you taught in?
Oh, sure.
Which ones were they?
First Bushwick High School. I was an English teacher on my math license. And then I was appointed to elementary school, which I didn't want, but I was one of the highest on the list and was advised to take it. And it was PS 187 in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And I taught there most of the rest of my life. And then during that time, I also taught in St. Joseph's College. I gave a course on marriage for 14 years.
Very nice. Well, we've gone through quite a bit. We've looked back at the grandparents of my children, your parents. We've even mentioned your grandparents, both of you, briefly, but we didn't get into any detail on what I would call the great-grandparents. But we did talk about your brothers, and rather your parents' brothers and sisters, or your aunts and uncles, and something about their marriage partners, and something in the way about their children, but not very much. We've also discussed something about your own background in terms of education, what schools you attended, and how long and when you went to school. We've also mentioned when you were married, where you lived. We've gone through the names of all of your children. And briefly, a little bit about what kinds of work Grandpa has done throughout his career and Grandma's career in working. There are lots of other things we could talk about, but at this point we're just about to the end of this tape.
Okay.
And we've covered quite a span of years.
I can give you one. We got room on there. I can give you. Here's my note. I can tell you that my dad's, that is my great grandfather, John Leahy, was born in 1783 and died in 1881, and he is the oldest Ryan member with a grave in the United States.
Very good.
Was he shipwrecked in?
What's that?
Was he the one who was shipwrecked coming over?
He was.
Newfoundland?
He was part of that group.
Okay, let me just end this up by saying this is April 6, 1975. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and we're in Setauket.
East Setauket.
East Setauket, or Poquat,
Poquat
Village.
Poquat
Village, Long Island. And Pat Ryan, my wife, is with us. I'm John Casey, and we're talking to Mr. and Mrs. Ryan,
and I'm sober.
And everybody is sober.